Good morning, everyone. We have a pretty packed agenda, so we want to take advantage of every minute that we have on the agenda. So if people could please take their seats. I think it is 8:30. My mother always told me to be prompt, be on time. So I'm Barbara Schneeman. I'm chair of the work group committee for this particular work group. And my objective in my introduction is to provide some background and insight on the origins of this workshop and the planning committee's approach to developing our agenda for the next 2 days. As we move through the agenda over these 2 days, please keep in mind that the National Academies workshops are meant to explore scientific topics and not to provide conclusions or recommendations. In other words, this is not leading to a consensus study, a consensus report. It's really to explore some scientific questions. That said, the proceedings from the workshop will be published, and it's my understanding the Academy is aiming at having the publication ready this summer, I believe, and it will be announced at the website that is the information source for the website. And when it is published, there will be a PDF that's available for downloading. So where do I change the slides? Clicker? Oh. Something with this large green arrow on it. For all the speakers, there's a large green arrow. So that said then, this slide acknowledges the sponsors for the workshop. We're fortunate in that we've had 5 government sponsors and 3 non-government organizations. From the U.S., we've had the Food and Drug Administration sponsorship. From the National Institutes of Health, we've had the Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Disease, the National Cancer Institute, and the Office of Dietary Supplements. We've also been fortunate to have Health Canada as one of our supporters for the workshop. In terms of the non-government organizations that support the workshop, we have the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Society of Nutrition, and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Obviously, we greatly appreciate the support, and it's important to keep in mind that the sponsors for a workshop not only provide the funding that enables the workshop to move forward, but they also provide very thoughtful and considerate guidelines and information on what would be useful for the workshop to consider. So a lot of thought and care has gone into constructing the statement of task for the workshop, and that's what the sponsors provide to us. So on this slide, I've outlined the names of the planning committee members. I'm not going to go through all their names. You will be meeting the planning committee members as we move through the agenda. They're moderators, they're speakers, they will be actively participating in the workshop. So you will hear from them as the 2 days progress. The one person who did have a last-minute unfortunate change in plans is Dr. Suskind, so he will not be able to join us, and we will accommodate that in our schedule. I think we've been very fortunate with the diversity of expertise that has been on the planning committee. I found it fascinating to interact with the group and hear the different perspectives as we put together the agenda. So, as mentioned, the statement of task that's provided from the sponsors to the National Academies is very important in guiding the committee's thinking. And you should have the statement of task in your material. If not, it's available online. It's important to keep that statement of task in mind. I put on this slide 2 sentences from the chapeau language in that statement of task. And I include them because I felt that these 2 sentences kind of capture the essence of thinking that influenced how the committee thought about the workshop. And I'll just read them. That the task is to convene a public workshop to explore the evidence for special nutritional requirements in disease states and medical conditions that cannot be met with normal diet. The workshop will review the currently available evidence used to determine potential nutritional requirements that are not encompassed within the normal population variation. So I think those 2 sentences really capture some important thinking. Now, the statement of task also included 5 questions listed as potential questions for the workshop to consider in its discussion. And I'm going to just quickly review them with you. The emphasis, the bold lettering that I've added, that's mine. It was not in the statement of task. That's my way of trying to focus in on what I think is the main point in each of the questions. So first, when does a physiological state result in a unique nutritional requirement? And to really start probing to understand, are there principles that help identify that disease-related nutritional requirement? When is it no longer encompassed within the normal population variation? And understanding how genetic variations can impact a nutrient requirement. Secondly, what principles can be learned from the use of dietary nutritional management of certain chronic conditions or diseases. And the example given of inborn errors of metabolism, where we know that there are unique nutritional requirements. What can we learn from that? And can we use that knowledge and understanding to look at other conditions? Third, how does a disease state impact nutrient metabolism and nutritional status? And conversely, what is the impact of nutritional status on the disease state? And part of this question was also probing the question of markers. Are there markers of nutritional status and metabolism in disease states that can help us understand what's going on? Fourth is asking the question of how using a nutritional intervention can in fact improve patient outcomes. And the 5th question dealt with strategies to improve access to up-to-date disease management strategies and solutions, sort of looking to how do we keep moving this field forward. So these questions were important for the committee in terms of its planning effort, but they were, of course, also provided to the speakers for each of the sessions, so they understood the scope of what is in the statement of task. So to summarize then, if we look at what is included, the emphasis is on nutrients and nutrient requirements in certain disease states, medical conditions or chronic conditions. And the diseases that I've listed as for example, inborn errors of metabolism, burns or surgical trauma, cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, traumatic brain injury, those are all examples that were listed in the statement of task, so they influence the way the committee thought of the agenda. Well, just as it's important to look at what's included, it's also important to look at what is not in the statement of task. And the first item I want to highlight that is not in the statement of task is medical foods. FDA, through its guidance documents, has outlined several factors that define a medical food. A distinct nutritional requirement is only one of those factors. And it's one of the important scientific questions. So in our workshop, we're not looking generally at medical foods, but putting the emphasis on the special nutrient requirement. Likewise, foods for special dietary use are used for meeting special dietary needs due to various conditions, but it's meeting normal nutrient requirements. Health claims, nutrient content claims, structure function claims, these are all used on foods for the general population. And for example, a health claim about reducing risk of certain chronic diseases, that is primary prevention. It's reducing the risk in a general population. A nutrient content claim is a nutrient profile statement. And that nutrient profile comes from the daily values, which are derived from the dietary reference intakes. So they're within the normal variation of nutrient requirement, whereas we're trying to look at what's outside of normal. Likewise, structure function claims are claims about maintaining the structure or function of the body in a healthy person. Now, obviously, we understand that when it comes to the practical end of thinking about special nutrient requirements, there may be some reference to medical foods. But that is not our objective here. It's really to think in terms of that special nutrient requirement aspect. So with that as background, the statement of task and the thinking, the committee set out to have workshop objectives. And just to go through those objectives that you have on the agenda, it's to examine the pathophysiological mechanism by which specific diseases impact nutrient metabolism and nutritional status, and whether that impact would result in nutrient requirements that differ from the dietary reference intakes. So it's exploring genetic variation, it's examining nutrient requirements in certain chronic conditions or acute phases, it's considering the scientific evidence needed to establish such relationships and understanding what the principles might be about those relationships. It's exploring how disease states impact nutrient metabolism and nutrient status. And then identifying promising approaches and challenges to establishing a framework for determining special nutrient requirements to manage disease states. I do want to point out also that I think it's worthwhile to look at this workshop in the context of other work that the Academy has been doing in this area related to nutrition. And obviously, one of the first reports we would think about are the dietary reference intake reports. Again, that's looking at nutrient requirements for the general population. It's understanding that normal variation. We're trying to understand what happens when it's outside of normal. Likewise, the recent report on developing dietary reference intakes based on chronic diseases, another context for the DRI that on how to address the role of nutrients and other food substances in reducing disease risk within the general population. Again, thinking more in terms of primary prevention, but how do we use our DRI framework in that context? There was a recent food forum, and the publication, I think, just came out for this workshop on nutrigenomics and the future of nutrition. And again, looking at how genetics can influence the variability in nutrient requirement. A workshop, so once again, more exploratory. And then finally, I would point to the redesigning the process for establishing the dietary guidelines for Americans, which included in its recommendation an understanding that the dietary guidelines for Americans should include the general population, which may include individuals with certain types of chronic disease. So again, this is a separate effort, but put together with the body of work, it really begins to explore how we're thinking about nutrition. And I think one of the questions still left unresolved is what should be the role of nutrition in managing disease. And I think that's part of what we're beginning to explore with this workshop. So with that, I will move to our first session, and I will remind you again, our goal is to explore the scientific questions. We're not reaching conclusions or making recommendations, but really trying to understand the science that's important in this area. So the the first session, and I will point out to all the speakers before we begin, we have our standard little set of lights here. Green means you can keep talking, yellow means you have 5 minutes, and red means please allow time for discussion. And all of the sessions are structured such that we'll have the speakers, and then we'll have question and answers and a moderated discussion at the end of the session. So our first session, and also we're going to keep introductions very brief. Basically, you're going to get the name and the affiliation. And the bios are in your meeting material. We encourage you to read those bios because our speakers are incredibly qualified to address the questions that we're asking. But we want to have as much time as possible for our discussion here. So the first session will be to introduce the concepts and context for the workshop, and it's two of our committee members who will do this. We'll start with Patsy Brannon from Cornell University on what defines a special nutrient requirement, how are we thinking about that, and then Patrick Stover, who the whole time we worked with him, he was at Cornell, but now he's at Texas A&M. He will talk about the underlying biological processes of special nutrient requirements. So we'll start with Patsy.